Good evening and welcome to the Q&A show. We're live and interactive. My name is Cyrus. I'm here for the next 1 hour here to take your questions. And we've got a very special guest to answer your questions this evening. And it's Dr. Grady McMurtry from the US of A. Dr. Grady, how you doing?
Especially the A. Doing great. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you so much, Grady. It's not the normal backdrop that we normally see you from your Florida home. So where are you speaking to us this evening?
From the room in a church near Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay, and I assume you're doing some talks and you're busy traveling around at the moment. Tell our viewers more.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I'll be here through Wednesday night. I typically do Sunday morning through Wednesday night. Thursday morning, I drive to North Carolina.
Okay. As you are in the US of A, there's an article that caught my eye from Christian today, and I'd love to get your thoughts and your insights into this. And it's also following the recent assassination attempts on former President Donald Trump, but also talking about the American elections. This one caught my eye. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. It's talking about Kamala Harris would proudly sign law giving rights to abortion. That's an interesting one. Let's read a little bit about it. It's from Christian today. It says Kamala Harris said she would proudly sign a bill into law that restored the federal rights of an abortion. She went on to say one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government and Donald Trump certainly should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. Harris said, so Harris is, as Harris said, Harris is arguing that Jesus is for or allows abortion under the authority of the government as a righteous and holy right. Kamala Harris says that she is all for Americans. She made this statement numerous times during the first presidential debate. Former President Donald Trump stood to fight for the right for the unborn child, the one who can't speak for themselves. This took great courage, and regardless of what you think of him as a human being or a person, it is important that God's people support God's biblical principles. And the article continues to go on to say, in Romans 13 tells us why governments exist. It exists to represent God's view to the people. Government officials are not to be a terror to good behavior, but to be bad. The Apostle Paul tells us that government is established by God at his agent for our good. So, Dr. Grady, I'd love to get your thoughts, your insight. Obviously, it's a presidential campaign now. Who's going to be the next US president, President Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, who is currently the vice president? Give us an insight into your thoughts of what the situation is at the moment. Also, this particular article, please.
Well, it is unfortunate because the Democratic Party has now become the Communist Party of the United States. Kamala Harris is not for people. She's actually a Marxist, raised by a Marxist. That's irrefutable. Her policies are as anti-American in terms of our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, as they could possibly be. Obviously, when she says that Jesus approves of abortion, she doesn't know the Bible because I don't know if she's even read a page of it. Everything she says is incorrect. That includes economic policies, moral issues. It doesn't matter what it is. She is always on the wrong side.
What is the general consensus at the moment in the US of A? What are the people thinking? Obviously, I mentioned at the beginning of the program there was another second assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life just this weekend. What is the feeling? Is there a lot of anger from the Democrats towards Donald Trump? Can you give us an insight?
Well, I certainly would not want a second successful assassination attempt or a third one, which might occur in the future. But it is these people who are evolutionists, anarchists, we could use all kinds of other terms for them, but atheists, who do not believe in God, who actually believe that man is the measure of himself, that man makes his own laws, that there's no absolute truth, no absolute right and wrong. And when they are challenged, they defend their atheism dogmatically. It's interesting how fervently religious and dogmatic they are about their atheism. Here in the United States, of course, there's been a great conflict, and at the moment, unfortunately, it's about 50-50. There's actually less than 50% of the population of the United States who are claiming to be Christians. Strange bedfellows though may be, but when it comes to the question of abortion, Christians, Jews, and Muslims all agree that abortion is wrong.
We recently saw the debate between Harris and Trump. What were your thoughts on that? Give us an insight.
Well, she didn't give any information. She simply said, "Oh, we're going to have a happy clappy time if I'm elected." She's talked about an opportunity economy and never defined what she meant. She never answered any question directly. She never gave any definitive policy positions. She was nothing but a talking head. Now, she looked good on the TV in terms of appearance, demeanor, etc. But she said absolutely nothing worth listening to.
What is the general consensus of the churches around America towards her beliefs and her beliefs on her faith, more importantly?
Well, if somebody could define me, whatever her faith may be outside of the Marxism, which she proudly does represent, I would like to know what it is. Because she is a Marxist, was raised by a Marxist, it believes in communism. That's her religion, and therefore I would like to know if she's ever read the Bible. I've never heard her say anything that would make me think she had. Certainly, again, I want to stress that on the moral issues and on the economy, she's 180 degrees wrong. Now, Mr. Trump has a track record of 4 years previously in which he did a great deal of good for Christians and, generally speaking, people of faith. Whatever that faith may be. He did wonders for the economy, but she will not. She will absolutely cause the United States, if elected, to go into a complete depression.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grady. Yeah, we're live, we're interactive, and this program, it really is all about our viewers. So do email us live@revelationtv.com. SMS details are on screen, and it was really interesting, Dr. Grady. Thank you so much for sharing that as well, because I think from a Christian perspective, it's interesting to see what candidates have. Obviously, we've recently had the elections in the United Kingdom and England with the new Prime Minister, with Keir Starmer. But from your perspective, on behalf of us as Christians, what is it that we should be looking out for a leader standing up for our biblical perspective, biblical views? What are the key points? I mean, we've got viewers, international viewers on Revelation TV from different countries, and there's constantly elections in various countries. So what are the key points from a Christian perspective, especially during an election campaign?
Well, my first comment would be, remember, you can't get it all at one time. When it comes to politics, you must think incrementally. And so you cannot be a one-issue voter. That's absolutely wrong. What you can do, though, is you can start implementing policies which are moving to the right, to a more biblical position. And so you have to start by getting the left to move right. And so that's typically the moderates. And explaining to them that it is to their benefit. You know, a Christian government, whether you're a Christian or not, but a Christian government is beneficial. We would support a capitalistic economy where people can actually benefit from effort. In communism, the government benefits from your effort. And that means that you actually take away all incentive to do useful work. So we want to take a look at economic issues. I think that may be what helps President Trump get reelected. Then, of course, on moral issues, again, we want to stress that if you try to enforce moral issues immediately and dogmatically from the Bible onto a population of mixed faiths, that's not going to work. But there are many faiths that can, in fact, agree and support each other on issues like abortion, like euthanasia. We can agree on economics. We can agree on care of the older folks in our population. So there are things we can agree on. but we disagree on doctrines, of course. And so what you have to do is you have to start pushing to the right. And here's the single biggest issue with that. The people on the right of whatever country, whatever language, unfortunately, the left will always say, well, if you just come our direction and compromise, then we can get something done. And that's the unfortunate thing. Once a conservative compromises, they get drawn to the middle. And the problem is they forget to go back where they started. And the left does remember to go back where they started. So the next time they will say, well, if you'll meet us in the middle, and they keep moving the right to the left. We've got to use a similar tactic, but we've got to move them to the right.
Can you give our viewers, and obviously you're biblical creation scientist, can you give us the latest, any updates or any information, new information that is coming out in relation to science that we can share with our viewers this evening?
Well, of course, there's always developments in every area of science. I'm very interested in some of the medical things that are going on right now. I'm interested in bioethics, for instance. But constantly we're seeing research that's being published that it actually fulfills the creation mandate of Genesis chapter 1. The creation mandate is that we're to study what God did and how he did it in order to benefit the entire population, not merely ourselves individually. And so developments, for instance, in surgeries, developments in medicines, developments in replacements, regeneration. As a matter of fact, I think that we talked about that maybe the last time we were together, that we are approaching the point where we may be able to trigger the body into regeneration of its own material. That would be a tremendous development. But there's also developments with, for instance, the Webb satellite in terms of seeing objects in space that we've never been able to see or as well. We see things that are in paleontology, studies that have shown a new species of dinosaur here or there. But really, the problem with that is the interpretation. Because when evolutionary scientists publish anything, again, astronomy, paleontology, biology, they always give it their spin. For the creationists, we have exactly the same evidence. And we have our spin, if I may say it that way. The question becomes, which spin is the best one? Which one is based in the evidence? Which one is consistent with reality? And evolutionist is not consistent with reality, but creation is.
Wow. This email's come in from Cynthia. Thank you very much, Cynthia, writing in. Dear Dr. Grady, in the last few days we have seen news coverage of awful floods over a large part of Europe, which I can't remember seeing on such a large scale before. Also, Vietnam has had a serious earthquake recently. Is there an explanation for this, please? Cynthia in West Sussex.
Well, the Vietnam earthquake is really an extension of the Ring of Fire. That's not unusual in that part of the world at all. If you think about how close it is to, say, Indonesia, and how many volcanoes and how many earthquakes occur in that general area of Southeast Asia, that's not surprising at all, and not unusual. In terms of weather, I would suggest to you that I can remember when flooding was worse than it is right now. But right now we're going through a transition from a La Nina to, we're going to transition from a La Nina. Yeah, I'll get it in a second because you're in Spain.
Take two. It's a good job we're not live.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, take 2 aspirin. See me in the morning. We're going from an El Nino to a La Nina situation in the Pacific. And that is causing weather patterns to change. But when I say that, the weather patterns themselves are not actually changing. What's occurring is that the same weather patterns are occurring, but they are shifting from east to west because of the shift from the El Nino to the La Nina. But actually, the weather patterns are the same in one sense of the word, but that shifts where we have dry areas and wet areas. Now, my wife and I were just talking about this recently. We have had a horrendous amount of rain in Florida in the last couple of weeks. Now, that's part of our rainy season, but we've had an unusually high amount of rain, and it's noticeable. And so that's simply part of the shift. And so the wind currents shift from east to west as the weather conditions in the southern Pacific shift from east to west or back to east. And so again, these are natural events, has nothing to do with humans. Remember that as a Bible believing Christian, God is in charge of the weather and he uses it to bless people or to correct them.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you, Dr. Grady, for that. So, Cynthia, I hope that's answered your question. This one's from Tammy. Thank you, Tammy and Norma, for writing in. Hi, Cyrus and Dr. Grady. Good evening to you both. I've been told we have entered a grand solar minimum with something happening on October 24th. Can you give me more information on this? Looking it up, I understand this affects the magnetic field and means that we are going to get even colder than now. That's Warwickshire in UK. I know volcanoes cause cooling and pollution, but never heard of a grand solar minimum. Any ideas?
Okay, well, first of all, there's a little something wrong here we need to correct. But let's talk about solar minimums and solar maximums. What we're talking about here is sunspot activity. Now, the sunspot activity has been increasing over the last couple of years, but this is part of a normal, usually about 11-year cycle. But actually, we're going towards a maximum, not a minimum, of the sunspot activity at the moment. But we have had quite a bit of volcanic activity, too. And so these things all combine together. And sometimes two events, sunspot activity and volcanic activity, combine where we have an increase in warming. Sometimes, if they hit just right, they both cool at the same time and really force a cooling period. And sometimes they kind of negate each other. We've talked about this before, but right now, this sunspot cycle 25 and the previous one 24 have actually been much lower in intensity than the previous solar cycles before that. But you never know. There's been a spike in sunspot activity recently, but again, it's nothing as high as we've had in the past. A couple of sunspot cycles going back into the 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s. And no one can predict, only God knows what's going to happen next. Now, we just had a really, really big solar flare erupt. That's a sunspot activity kind of thing. But I wouldn't be terribly concerned about that. Well, it is natural. It is normal.
Norma's actually continued to say, what are the eco-terrorists saying about ignoring it or blaming the man for the effects of the magnetic field? I watch very little MSM and I haven't heard any sprouting from the eco-terrorists. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, again, let's not confuse things here. The Earth's magnetic field and the magnetic field of the sun. The Earth's magnetic field is in a continuous process of slow, gradual decay because the energy is being used up out of it to maintain the field that it produces. And it's a major factor in shielding us from intense radiation coming from the sun or the solar system that's mostly the sun, what's called the solar winds, but also galactic radiation that does come into the solar system too. And so it's our protection, it's a shield. But as the energy is being lost, the shield is shrinking, weakening, getting smaller, and more of that radiation is getting through. I would point out that while this is hardly the only factor, had you noticed that cancer rates are going straight up? And part of that is due to the increase of radiation due to the decrease of the Earth's magnetic field. The sunspot activity on the surface of the sun does change its magnetism so that on the surface it comes and goes, but the sun also has a fairly steady magnetic field of its own. It's just that these sunspots combine with it and can, when it's very strong, actually come past us in the orbit and help to protect us. But when it shrinks down, then we get more radiation from the galactic radiation. But all these things combined in a totally natural way, and people are not involved with it whatsoever.
This one's from Chris in Penzance. Say, good evening, Cyrus and Dr. Grady. The question is, what do you think if a church leadership has a tactful way of making an individual church member uneasy to make him or her leave the church when it's not Christian to do so and has no reason?
Of course, I'd really like to know more about that situation individually. However, if you are uncomfortable with church leadership and you cannot address it by going to them as biblically, one-on-one to start with, then as a group, secondly, then you can reach a point where you need to seek another church. When somebody is being manipulated, that is to say, when a Christian is being manipulated by a non-Christian, or sometimes when a Christian is being manipulated by a Christian, what falls into the line there is what's referred to as white magic. That would be the biblical terminology. Because when you're manipulating people against their will, it's a form of white magic.
I do hope it works out for you, Chris, as well. This next one here is from Duncan saying, Duncan in Inverness, good evening, Cyrus and Dr. Grady. How was the serpent in Genesis 3 punished for its wickedness? Did God remove its legs or just bruise its head? Make it eat dust and make it move on its body? Are serpents around today? If so, what would we be an example? Thanks for answering this daft question. Duncan in Inverness.
Well, first of all, the word serpent means reptile. And certainly we have plenty of reptiles today: alligators, crocodiles, caravels, the little lizards in my backyard. So serpents as reptiles, yes, they still exist today. It's interesting in the Bible, though, the word serpent is used to describe flying reptiles, flying serpents. That's, for instance, in Isaiah. Dinosaurs, the large marine reptiles such as Leviathan that's mentioned in the Bible. So dinosaurs can be included there, but not all reptiles are dinosaurs. I hope that kind of helps there. In terms of the rest of his question, besides serpents, he was asking what?
Are serpents around today? If so, what would be an example? I think you've just answered it.
Well, I've given those.
You've just answered it.
Yes, but does he have another part to his question?
Did God remove its legs or just bruise its head, make it eat dust and make it move its own body?
Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is that he was, of course, cursed for his wickedness, but that's actually Satan. The animal itself was not cursed. Satan possessed an animal. It's the only way that you could get these words coming out of what the Bible actually calls a viper. So it didn't have legs to begin with. But when God says you shall, he's describing its behavior, and it's going to do that. And when it says eats dust, that's what many snakes do. Many people don't realize that, but you've seen the forked tongue of snakes flickering in and out, right?
Yeah.
Well, what that snake is actually doing is that's an organ that a sensing organ that is used to help the snake gain information.
Okay.
Because as the tongue goes out, dust collects on the tip of the tongue, then it's brought back into the mouth, and it's forced up against the roof of the mouth, against Jacobson's organs. And it's a sensing mechanism just like hearing and seeing.
Wow. Okay, and what next? What do they use with that information? What do they do next, Grady?
Well, my point was that the animal didn't sin, but Satan was sinning in his use of it to deceive Adam and Eve. You know, it's not the first time an animal talks or appears to talk, but the animal actually isn't talking. You know, Balaam's mule spoke, but the animal itself couldn't speak. And so this is a supernatural thing. It's not a physical thing.
And another part of Duncan's question as well, Grady, is what is the correct basis for reputing carbon dating? First of all, just give our viewers an insight into carbon dating if you can.
Oh, dear. Well, nitrogen-14 in the upper atmosphere is converted to a radioactive element called carbon-14, which mixes with the rest of the atmosphere, but it's radioactive and it decays. It has a half-life of 5,730 years. The concept is that as Star Trek and Star Wars and everything else, we are carbon-based units. And so some of that carbon gets taken into us as well. And the theory is that when we die, we have a certain amount, and the longer we're dead, the less we have. And somehow or another, you could use that information to determine how long ago a creature lived or a person lived when the event occurred. The fact of the matter is, though, that carbon-14 simply does not work. All of these methods that evolutionists tout, uranium turning into lead, potassium into argon, rubidium into strontium, all of these things start with 6 fatal flaws, so that none of them work. But carbon-14 is far worse. It has over 20 fatal flaws, and we have discussed some of those on the previous programs. But the fact of the matter is, it does not work except for one thing. It proves categorically that the Earth is young. And that's the only thing it's good for. So when somebody says that they've dated an artifact or a bone using carbon-14, it's a false date. Remember that we can only determine what is in the here and now. We can only determine the ratio of isotopes today. But we cannot know the starting conditions, and therefore everything is assumption.
Okay, thank you so much, Grady. This is from William. William, I think you win the prize for the funniest email of the evening, because this is how William starts his email, Grady. He says, hello, thank you for a great show. Cyrus, do you have a fan club? I do. It's called cyrusfanclub.com. Okay, I'm joking. I'm only kidding. The question is from William. He says this: any debate class will require students to represent the best case for the other side. Would Grady give the best case for evolution? Thank you, from William.
Well, I can't, because there aren't any.
Oh, good answer.
every single quote proof they have for evolution is easily shown to be false. Most of them will start with things like the proof by ranking, easily disproved. They will start by the misinterpretation or deception techniques, such as we were just talking about, the radiometric dating processes. They will teach you about the laws of thermodynamics, but the laws of thermodynamics prove that evolution is not true. So there aren't any, and I'm not just being facetious. I'm not just simply trying to blow anybody off. Evolution is not science. Evolution is religion. But we, certainly as Christians, have our religion, but good science is in complete compatibility with the Bible.
Okay, this next one here is from Chris. Chris, you asked about Chris whether he had further comments from his previous email, and Chris has kindly written in and saying, asking the question in my previous email, broadly speaking, were not the church body once in sin to get to where they are now in Christ? So that's what Chris was referring to in his previous email.
I'm sorry, I didn't really understand that.
Let me go back to Chris's original email, Grady. What do you think if a church leadership has a tactful way of making an individual church member uneasy to make him or her leave the church when it's not the Christian to do so and has no reason? And then Chris continues to write as well, were not the church body once in sin to get to where they are now in Christ?
Yeah, and that's what I don't quite follow in terms of the logic of that. But I thought from the original question, at least as I was listening, that he was talking about church leadership trying to force people to stay, making them uneasy to leave. Was that wrong?
Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense to me, Grady, yeah.
From what I heard. And my point was, there are biblical standards by which we are to determine church policies, church politics, you might say. And we shouldn't be making it condemnation for somebody to switch from one church to another. Because, again, leadership can be flawed because we're human. And so there are many examples of this in the Old Testament especially, where the leadership could sin. And if they're trying to manipulate a believer to stay against their will, that would be a thing that I said they should go ahead and just leave. You shouldn't leave for silly reasons, of course. And you may choose to stay in order to try to correct the wrongs that are there. But there may come a time when they are simply not listening, and you might have to leave.
Thank you, Grady. And Chris, hopefully that's answered your question. This next one's from Bill in Northern Ireland. Thank you, Bill, for writing in. Hi, Cyrus and Dr. Grady. I'm just wondering if it's true that governments are using cloud seeding to try and control the weather, or is this just a conspiracy theory? I have noticed jets flying over during the summer, and trails seem to last a long time. The sky then becomes cloudy. God bless, from Bill in Northern Ireland. We actually talked about this a few weeks ago, didn't we? The cloud seeding. It's very real to a certain extent.
We did a long session on that.
That was a good one.
I would suggest you might want to. It was good, but I would suggest, again, maybe going to the archives of the programs we've been doing. And can you remember, was that, what, 1 or 2 months ago?
That was, yeah, I think it was just, yeah, exactly. RevelationTV.com/videos, and you'll be able to see that. It's also on our YouTube channel as well. And if you just type on YouTube, Cloud Seeding, Revelation TV Q&A show, you'll be able to see that program. And Grady very kindly went into great amount of detail. Why don't you give our viewers a little insight, Grady, of what you shared on that program? Give them a little taster.
Well, I've said that cloud seeding has actually been going on for many, many decades and has been used to prevent weather from becoming extreme. But, of course, there recently has been the idea that governments can use it as a weapon. But the clouds, I really don't think belong to the country they're passing over. Again, those are God's clouds. But we had a long discussion about how long it's been done, what it's been done for. It can be done to, of course, be productive, to put water on crops. But when you do that, you could also be stealing water from your neighbor. And so there are moral issues as well as the scientific ones.
And that program was actually on Monday, the 1st of July. There you go. So you can go and have a look at that, and I really encourage you to do so. It's a very interesting program. This next one...
more months ago than I remembered.
Yeah, exactly. Time flies when you're having fun, Grady. Just before our summer break. Okay, this one's from Thomas and Diane. Nice to hear from you, Thomas and Diane. Hi, Cyrus and Dr. Grady. Thanks for taking the time for us. If we approach the 7 years of Daniel, is it not true that God will put in charge the people who will bring these predicted times to pass, and those people in charge will not be for God, except Ben and Israel? Bless them. We pray for all. Love, Thomas and Diane.
Forgive me, I'm a little not sure of exactly what you're talking about, but I can say that God is always 100% in control, and when he wants an event to occur, it will occur. And therefore, he does move his people into places where the events will come about, such as an exact date. And God's very good at doing things that he does the same thing on the same day of the calendar multiple times. So if he's in charge, he's 100% in charge.
Very good. Thank you, Greg. Hopefully that's answered your question. If you've got any further questions, feel free to write in. We've still got a little bit of time left. This next one's here from Kev in Chepstow. Thanks, Kev, for writing in. Hi to you both. Great show as always. During the millennium, will children be born?
Well, you're dealing with eschatological questions that I don't deal with, but as we read about the millennium, it appears that there will be people doing normal things, that children would be born, raised to adulthood, etc. And I would refer you, of course, to read the scriptures directly for yourself and determine it yourself. But it's not my field of expertise either.
This one's from Satinda asking about outer darkness. Greetings to you both. What and where is outer darkness mentioned in the Bible?
Well, again, that question might have multiple answers, so I'm not sure whether he is talking about.
Let me continue, because I think that was the first part. And then the second part says, also, does it suggest a third location in eternity? And if so, who goes there?
Well, there's heaven or hell. That's all there is. There isn't a third choice. Right. And so if you were applying the term darkness or hell, as it is sometimes used metaphorically, then I'm not sure that's what you're thinking about, but it could be. But remember that darkness is also simply absence of light, too. But God is the source of all light, that he's the light giver. Jesus is the light of the world. And with him there is no darkness. So we can infer metaphorically that light is good and dark is evil and so on. But I really wanted to ask the tenant to go to a concordance and find the various references for himself.
Very good, Grady. Dave written in to say hi to you both. In the Garden of Eden, the snake or the serpent, whatever you want to call it, tricked the woman, i.e. Eve, to eat the fruit from the tree. Why did it choose the woman to trick and not the man, Adam? Plus, do we actually know what the fruit was? So why did he choose Eve and not Adam?
Well, first of all, we do not know what the fruit was, but if you'll read the story very carefully, it is interesting. It's not a trick, it's deception. Eve was deceived first, but Adam is the one who sinned first. And I say that categorically. Paul actually talks about that in Romans 5:12, the man sinned first. So Satan chose Eve because she was the weaker vessel. And when I say that, I'm talking about not that a woman is inferior, but the weaker vessel in the sense of God had told Adam what the rule was. And Adam was to teach his wife what the rules are. And Adam was standing right next to her when she was deceived. And so he sinned by not protecting his wife, not using the authority that God had given him, because he could have said, you've misquoted God and be gone. And Adam had the authority to do it at that time.
Very interesting indeed. This next one here is from Mary. Thank you, Mary, for writing in. It's a lovely name. It's my grandmother's name, Mary. I love her dearly. This one says, money for missionary work. And is it right to fundraise for a Christian work? For fundraising for missionary work. What are your thoughts, Grady?
Well, I am a missionary. Therefore, yes, I think it is just fine. I would point out that Revelation is also a mission work of a sort, and that one reason that they had to raise money in order to do the work that they're doing around the world, which I personally highly endorse. But yes, we are to tithe, but we're also to offer. So if you've taken care of the tithe, at that point, you can then make offerings to organizations like ours, others. There's, got to be close to 1 million different ones, I think. But the real questions are they doing the work that they're claiming they're raising the money for?
Yeah.
That's a high standard. And so I know that we have organizations in the United States, I think you certainly do in the UK, that look at charities like ours, and determine whether they are simply funding their own pocketbook or whether they're using the money wisely to carry the gospel around the world.
And it's so interesting. We, Revelation TV, we have programs like Time for Revelation, which are once a month fundraising program, which is actually this Thursday evening at 9 o'clock UK time. But it's where we share the needs and the funds of Revelation TV, but it's so transparent. And I think that is what's the unique thing about Revelation TV, because maybe some other charities maybe are transparent, maybe they're not so transparent, but Revelation TV, we really do say it as it is. And I think that's why we're loved and followed and supported by so many of our dear viewers who we sincerely do always appreciate. Dr. Grady, Dave's written in to say it was only after Adam and Eve sinned that humans and certain kind of animals became carnivorous. Before this point, they would have eaten nothing but plants. Does this mean eating meat is a sin?
Oh, absolutely not. Now, if we take a look at Genesis 1, 29 and 30, God made all creatures vegetarians, and that includes T-Rexes. It includes all kinds of animals with sharp claws and sharp teeth. And I want to stress that sharp claws and sharp teeth do not indicate that a creature is a carnivore or a meat eater. You need sharp teeth, sharp claws to also eat vegetable materials. And I would point out things like today alive iguanas, monitor lizards. I mean, even crocodiles eat vegetation to supplement their diets. However, of course, because of human sin, all systems are in decay. Now, God knows that's going to happen. And after the flood, notice in Genesis 9:3, it says, "Now you shall eat meat." That's not exclusive. That simply means now you will be and you should eat meat. From the standpoint of nutrition, many of the plants that existed before the flood were extinct. The plants are in the same state of decay that humans and animals are because of human sin. And so our digestive systems are in decay. The plants are in decay. And so because of the loss of this nutrition, we were to supplement vegetation with meat. And most vegetarians, in fact, do. Most vegetarians eat vegetation, but will supplement it with, for instance, fish or fowl, and simply avoid red meats. And so, no, I mean, Genesis 9:3 is quite explicit that God in his foreknowledge knows that to get all the amino acids that we need, we would now have to eat some meat along with the vegetation.
Very good indeed, Grady. This one is, sorry about this. Give me 1 second. Here we go. There we are. But the iPad went a little bit funny on me there, Grady. You can tell we're live. Here we go. This one's from Chris to say, thank you, brother and Cyrus and Dr. Grady for answering my question. Much appreciated and God bless. Well, we're happy to hear we answered your question there.
That's good. Thank you.
This one's from Marilyn in Wales. Thank you, Marilyn, for writing in. Hi, Cyrus and Dr. Grady. When people state to me that fossil minerals, etc., are millions of years old, I say, how do we know? We weren't there, i.e., science is what can be observed. Is that correct?
Well, the modern scientific method requires observation, and that's the problem. You can't go back in time and see rock formation. Now, we can make diamonds in a garage at the house with an oxyacetylene torch. It doesn't take millions of years to get a diamond. It doesn't take millions of years to get gold, etc. These are simply the deceptions used by evolutionists to get you to believe in evolutionary time, or what's called deep time. But the fact of the matter is, if we wanted to, we can make rocks in a day. We can make diamonds in a lab. It only takes 24 hours. But again, we can even do it in your garage at home. And so when I hand it to you, it's going to look like a natural diamond, even though the evolutionists say, well, it's 10 million years old. And so there's nothing about a rock that will tell you how old it is. Nothing. When you pick up rocks, they don't come with little white strings and little white tags attached saying how old they are and signed by a scientist that was there at the time. And so there's two different interpretations of the rock. Did it come about slowly and gradually through millions and billions of supposed years, or was it made yesterday, or was it made 100 years ago? You can't tell the difference. And there's no modern scientific technology to do anything accurately beyond written record. And the Bible is the greatest of all historical books.
Mark's written into asking questions saying, are wrongdoings made by people unable to control themselves through mental illness or addiction still taken into account by God when deciding whether they are going to heaven or to hell?
This is a question perhaps dealing with someone whose medical condition has changed and therefore they're no longer rational.
Yeah, mental illness, for example, Grady.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So not evil from the beginning, but people with Alzheimer's and other conditions that are at some point losing their mental faculties.
Yes.
Well, God, a commitment, then in fact, God will honor that commitment, because mental derangement later on from medical conditions isn't counted. God doesn't hold you accountable for accidental sin either.
Okay, this next one here is saying, can I ask, how did you gather your knowledge on the Bible, Dr. Grady?
Well, I started reading the Bible seriously in the process of becoming a Christian at the age of 27. And that was 50 years ago. And so it's 50 years of diligent study. Of course, please listen to good Bible teachers, but I want to say good Bible teachers. There's a lot of bad ones out there. Reading the Bible and allowing myself to read the Logos, but also allowing the Holy Spirit to show me Rhema too. And that's what every good Bible student should do. I'll point out that you don't just simply study the Bible either. You want to study, if you're going to be a good Bible student, reliable histories outside of the Bible, such as Josephus and others, because you will gain historical context, information that is not recorded in the Bible, but is related to us. I could give you some examples, but we really don't have the time at the moment. But you study the Bible diligently. Have good instructors that can aid and bring you along, show you the interrelationships. Unfortunately, most people read the Bible as two-dimensional, and it's purely a gift from God. I didn't deserve and I didn't ask for, but when I read the Bible, I see it in three dimensions. And so that's a difference, but that's just a unique gift God gave me.
What sort of Bible version would you recommend to our viewers, or any of our new viewers or non-believers that they're just starting hearing about Jesus Christ for the very first time, or they want to get into Bible reading? What Bible version would you recommend to our viewers this evening?
Well, I even did a half-hour program with Revelation. I don't know if you're still showing it occasionally on how to buy a Bible. That's not which one to buy, but how to buy, and the things to look for, like, are there italics in the Bible showing the words that were not originally there, for instance? Now, in terms of Bible selection, I use the New American Standard Bible or version as my primary study Bible. However, there's some very other good resources. One of the things about the English Bible translations is we have so many. In many languages, there's only 2 or 3 options at best. But in English, you today have 100 different translations. The problem is many of them are not very good. And you want to avoid the paraphrases. You want to avoid the very low-level translations that are out there. But it also depends somewhat on your age, education, because you may need to start with a simpler version to get the gist of things, and then move to a better translation to get the details right.
This one's asking here about the moons in the sky and the significance of the red moons. Recently, having single red or blue moons, my late father used to say that when something unlikely might happen, there would be a blue moon in the sky. How can we interpret this, please, Dr. Grady?
Well, first of all, the term blue moon simply refers to when 2 full moons occur within 1 month on the calendar. That's all the reason it's called that. Now, the pink or reddish moons is simply when the moon moves behind the Earth in its orbit during a time when the sun, earth, and moon line up properly, and so that reddish color is caused by the sunlight. Scientifically, it's called the terminator, but what the Bible calls it, the edge of light and darkness. That is, the Earth is rotating that 360-degree circle around the Earth, where the sunlight can just pass through the Earth's atmosphere all the way around. And when the moon is directly behind us, typically in a full moon position, obviously, then what happens is the sunlight goes to the atmosphere. It is the red light that gets onto the moon. It's kind of in a shadow, and that's when you get these red moons. Now, I don't think you should think anything about it like it somehow or another something that comes out of a horoscope, and I spell that with 2 R's. These are simply natural events, just as on the other side of our moon's orbit, we can get a solar eclipse, as we did earlier this year. I just coincidentally happened to be right in the path of the solar eclipse of the sun. Purely happenstance. It was kind of an interesting event. But that's on the other side when the moon is blocking out the sun. So the red moons are on the other side of the Earth where the Earth is blocking out the sun. Simply natural events.
Very good indeed. Thank you, Grady, for that. There are several instances in the Bible where God, that is Jesus, appeared in bodily form. For instance, in the Garden of Eden. Also, one of the three that visited Abraham, and these three were before he was born in Bethlehem. I assume that these were visitations took place with his resurrected body and with him being outside of our time. I also assume that this is not it is possible for him to visit wherever he wants and in period of our time from creation to the new heaven and earth. What are your thoughts, please?
Well, this is typically referred to as a pre-incarnate. A theophany is another word for that. When Jesus does, in fact, appear to Abraham, he appears to Paul after the death and resurrection. So these times when God steps in are called theophanies, a vision and so forth of Jesus before his death, burial, and resurrection. There's nothing unusual about that from a supernatural standpoint or a biblical one. They're considered to be norms, but that's what they are.
Very good indeed, Grady. This next one here is saying, where in the Bible does the so-called gap theory take place?
It doesn't. The gap theory is a totally false teaching. And again, we have done programs. You can go to my website. We have a video on the gap theory. We have books on the gap theory showing that it's not true. The gap theory didn't even come into existence until 1813 when a guy named Thomas Chalmers was trying to work evolutionary science and evolutionary time into the scriptures, because he was deceived in believing that the evolutionists were telling the truth about millions and billions of years. It's most unfortunate. It was picked up in the late 1800s. And, oh, by the way, Thomas Chalmers was involved with the Free Church of Scotland and its founding in the UK. But George Pember in the late 1800s expanded it. It was picked up by Dr. Schofield in his commentary. It was picked up later and used in Dake's commentary. But it's a false teaching. There was no gap at all. First of all, Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 are not two sentences. They are one sentence. The period at the end of verse 1 should not be there if you even have it. Remember that in the ancient languages, there were no punctuation marks to start with, period. And people are putting punctuation in as best they think it might fit, but it would not necessarily be correct.
This one's written in to say, post-flood, as waters receded, only salt water, what did Noah and co drink? Where did the non-salt water come from?
Well, first of all, let's talk about before the flood. Before the flood, there were seas described. When on day 3, the dry land rises up out of the water and God creates the dry land, there are seas. Now, that's the water that was on the surface on day 1, Genesis 1:1, 1:2. And so, first of all, there was the dry land on day 3. Now, there was rain before the flood, and there were artesian wells. But the rain was not the kind of rain you think of today. It says it was a mist. My best description of that is, if you have ever been in a rainforest, it's that kind of rain where the moisture simply swirls in the atmosphere and condenses on everything. And then it runs down tree trunks or street lamps and into the ground. Now, after the flood, of course, that's very different. And so what I want you to think about is this. There's a differentiation that occurs at the time of the flood. Before the flood, the people were on dry land and drinking rainwater and artesian well water, which was drinkable. There was some salt in the seas to begin with. But what happens at the time of the flood and after is a differentiation. because at the time of the flood, the water of the oceans that would follow became very salty very fast. And then the water goes away, for instance, in Psalm 105, verse 7. And we then would have the following. You're going to have erosion, very rapid erosion of sedimentary wet mud materials, adding a lot of salt to the oceans. But we're also going to get a lot of rain because you have very hot water evaporating into very cold air after the flood. And so the fish, for instance, that live on the dry land areas in ponds, lakes, streams, rivers, the water is becoming less salty, and more salt is being added to the oceans. And so, first of all, it was not tough to get water. And secondly, the reason we have freshwater fish and saltwater fish, and we have fish that live in both, has to do with their genetics. For instance, salmon live in freshwater, then saltwater, and then freshwater again. So it's genetics, it's the plan of God, it's the information and tools that God placed in them, knowing that the flood and its consequences would occur.
Very good, Dr. Grady. Thank you so much for answering that and all our questions this evening. I want you to give a little message or an inspirational message, if you can, please, to any of our viewers who are watching us this evening. Maybe they're going through difficulties in life, some sort of struggles, financial, family, whatever it is that they're going through. What message of hope can we give to our viewers this evening?
Well, the first hope is in salvation through Jesus Christ and your relationship with the Father through the Son, and the acceptance of his death, burial, and resurrection to atone for your personal sins. Now, after that, remember that the Bible clearly tells us that those who worship him, know him, that he considers us brothers, that he considers us as joint heirs, that in fact of infirmity in this lifetime, that in the future after death there will be no more sickness, no more infirmities, not even death,
Amen
because
to that.
Jesus has conquered it.
Amen. Dr. Grady McMurtry, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. And I want to really encourage our viewers to check out Dr. Grady's website, creationworldview.org. Thank you so much, Grady. God bless you, brother. Take care.
Good night now.
Thank you so much to all our viewers. And just like Dr. Grady said, if you are going for a difficult time in your life, I pray for you. Dear Heavenly Father, may this viewer who is watching us today draw closer to you. No matter what you're going through, I pray that you have that peace in your heart through Jesus Christ. Check out our video on demand, revelationtv.com. Until next time, take care. God bless you. See you soon. Bye-bye.